Amy, would you like to introduce yourself and tell everyone what we're going to be talking about today?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Matt. So, hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I am Amy Rodriguez, and I am the director of the therapeutic programs for the Cognitive Empowerment Program. So, it's a pleasure to be here and have the chance to talk with you today about word retrieval. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, Matt. So, let's see if I can manage to do this and you just tell me if it looks
Yep.
good. I'm going to put it in presenter mode. Okay, we're good.
Perfect.
Then. Okay, awesome. So we're going to be talking about word retrieval in aging and brain conditions. And so I'm going to first give a general overview about the word retrieval process. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how word retrieval can break down. And then finally, we'll talk about some approaches and strategies for improving word retrieval. So as we all know, word retrieval is an important part, a key part of communication. And so the ability to find and produce words actually involves many different parts of the brain working together in a very fast and rapid way. And as we all know, in the normal developmental process from young childhood through to adulthood, our brain undergoes many different changes. And so as a result of those changes, we see differences and challenges in the ability to retrieve words. And you might be surprised to find out, as I was, that those changes in the brain and how they impact word retrieval can happen as early as your late 20s or early 30s. So it's just a normal part of that aging process and something we all experience. So difficulty retrieving the right word at the right time is actually one of the most common complaints in aging and in cognitive impairment. So it's something I think we probably have all experienced at one time or another. So difficulties, as you know, can present themselves in different ways. Sometimes it's just saying the wrong word, so it's just an error in the word that you're saying, and that causes us to kind of reformulate what we're saying and try to come up with a different way to say it. Sometimes word retrieval difficulties can also cause delays in communication, and then what we call fillers and insertions. So sometimes we say, yeah, and we kind of try to fill that space with other words. Other things that can happen are the use of empty words. So if you can't come up with a word that you're trying to communicate, you might say that thing, right? Which is kind of an empty word because it does indicate that you're talking about an object, but it doesn't really provide any useful information about that. And then finally, what we can find ourselves doing, which is also a strategy, is what's called circumlocution, or talking around the word. So if you can't think of the word, you might try to start describing it. So, it's that thing, and you use it when you're cooking, and, it helps to strain the water out. And so then that kind of can sometimes help you come up with the word, but if not, it can help the person that you're speaking with to kind of understand what you're trying to say. So I'm just going to take one step back, before we jump in and just kind of talk about word retrieval and word production. And so word retrieval is really about, bringing together the meaning and the form. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But when we are retrieving and producing a word, that involves two different processes. It involves, language processes, and then it involves actually speech processes that allow us to articulate the words. So we have the meaning of the word that we want to say. We retrieve the form of it, and then we use all of our different muscles to actually produce that word. So today we're just going to kind of focus on that language part of it, which is just retrieving the meaning and the form. But I will say that in certain brain conditions, people can also experience difficulties with speech and actually producing the words in a way that's very clear and able to be understood. But we won't talk about that today. Okay, so like I mentioned, the reason for this slide is just to show all of the different parts of the brain that are involved when we are retrieving words. So word retrieval is a process that's supported both by memory and by language. And so we start with a concept or something that we want to communicate. And then, you can see in that yellow area of the brain is involved in retrieval of the word. And then it moves a little bit further back and we retrieve the sounds. And then the more towards the front in that blue area, that's the part of the brain that prepares all of the sounds that need to be produced. And then in the green area, that's the part of the brain that's responsible for actually producing the sounds. So all of that happens in about half a second when we have a word that we want to say. And throughout that time, our brain is also monitoring what we're saying. So oftentimes when you make an error, you realize, oh, that's not the word I meant to say. And that's because your brain is also constantly listening and monitoring. And that helps us to correct our errors. Now that doesn't always happen, right? I think we've all had that situation where someone said, don't you mean, something else? And you're like, yeah, isn't that what I said? And they'll say, no, you said this other thing. So, sometimes that monitoring doesn't catch the errors, but a lot of times it does. Okay, so now let's kind of just get into breaking down word retrieval into its two basic parts. So, word retrieval requires accessing information about meaning and about form. So meaning is just information and facts about, the related to the word that you're trying to produce. And then form is really your brain pulling together all kinds of information about the usage of that word. So what type of word is it? Is it a noun or a verb? The sentence structure that can support using that word, all of the different sounds within that word, and then the syllable structure. So how many syllables are in that word? And all of those things come together to help us retrieve and produce the right word. So I think just even looking at it from, those two really basic parts, we can sort of start to see where different breakdowns can happen in word retrieval. So let's take a look at that together, and we'll look at it, how it comes together first, and then we'll kind of look at how it might break down. So this is a picture of my dog, Herbie. And so I always try to figure out how I can sneak in a picture of Herbie in my presentation. So let's just say that I wanted to retrieve, a word. And, sometimes you're retrieving a word based on something that you're looking at, and sometimes it's just something that you have in your mind that you want to communicate. But either way, you're accessing, a concept. And so you activate different parts of, the meaning of that first. So, I see that picture and all of a sudden my brain is starting to activate the meaning of that. So this is a dog. Okay, dogs are furry. They have tails. They have 4 legs. They bark. So all of the different aspects of meaning that are involved, we're starting to activate that in our brain. Almost simultaneously, then we're, retrieving different parts of the form. So this is a noun. It's only got 1 syllable, and the sounds are G. So all that is what happens. We're activating our meaning networks and we're activating our form networks. And so all of that comes together for us to be able to say the word that we want to say very rapidly. Okay, so now that we have kind of that basic understanding of what's necessary to get the right word that we want to say, let's talk about how that may break down. So word retrieval breakdowns, like I said, are very common, happen all the time, and do become a little bit more, pronounced with aging, and can be an important part of different brain conditions. But when we're talking about, just your everyday word retrieval breakdown, sometimes that's been referred to as tip of the tongue. So y'all have probably heard the term tip of the tongue. And that's when you know exactly what you want to say, and the word is like right there on the tip of your tongue, but you just can't quite get it. So it's that feeling of knowing the word. And the reason why you have that is because you have accessed the meaning of the word. But the reason why you can't get the word is because you haven't accessed the full form. So sometimes you might think about, back to a time when you've had that sort of tip of the tongue, and it's like, I think it starts with a D, but I'm not sure, and so it's that you know what you want to say, and you kind of maybe even have parts of the word, but it just doesn't quite come together the way it needs to for you to be able to retrieve the word. So that's what's called a tip of the tongue. And that's really just that breakdown in being able to, produce or to retrieve the form. There's also what's called slips of the tongue. So and that's when the word that you actually produce is the wrong word. And when you produce the wrong word, that can be because of an error in meaning or an error in form. So if we think of the target word and the word that we want to say is dog, sometimes we make a meaning-based error and we say cat instead. Part of the reason why that happens is because there's lots of overlap in meaning between dogs and cats, right? They're all furry. They have 4 legs, cats meow instead of bark, but our brains have kind of started to activate similar meanings, and the brain then just kind of accidentally pulls the wrong word out of the hat. Then there's errors that are related to form. So if you say gog instead of dog, most of the sounds have been pulled, but they just got mixed up in the wrong order or duplicated. So when you have a slip of the tongue and say the wrong word, those are those are the reasons why that can happen. So like I said, these are pretty frequent. And when these kinds of word retrieval breakdowns happen, even though it kind of disrupts, the conversation for a minute, and you might need to take a break and correct yourself or think of the word, it doesn't necessarily it doesn't impact everyday communication effectiveness. However, there are different brain conditions that word retrieval deficits are more frequent and more severe, and they do impact daily communication and start to get in the way of quality of life. And so the formal term for word retrieval deficits that aren't part of the normal aging process are called anomia. And so if you hear that term, that's just a way of saying word retrieval deficits. And that comes from the a without and nomen name, so anomia. And so anomia is, pretty common. It's one of the most common, issues that people have after they've had stroke, traumatic brain injuries, brain tumors, and different progressive brain conditions. So And that's just because, as you might remember back, there's lots of areas of the brain that are involved in word retrieval. Deficits with word retrieval, like I said, and explained before, this can be due to a loss or weakness related to word meaning. So if your brain is kind of losing some of the meaning aspects, and what we call the semantic network has some breakdowns or some inefficiencies, or not, those connections aren't strong, then that can cause word retrieval impairment. Similarly, if the parts of the brain that are involved in form, or how you use the word, or how you pull the sounds and put them together for the word, that can also cause word retrieval deficits. And then there can be a disconnection or a weakness in the brain that that impacts that communication between word meaning and word form. And then finally, sometimes people struggle with difficulty selecting, holding, and using information about meaning and form, and that can also cause problems with word retrieval. So there are different ways that that words can become more difficult retrieving, and speech language pathologists are often the professionals who can help someone when they're having word retrieval deficits that do impact everyday life and kind of get in the way. Okay, so I want to talk just briefly about the common consequences, and then we'll jump into some things that might be able to help. So, and some of you may have experienced some of this before. Certainly, if word retrieval deficits happen often, they can be frustrating, right? You're trying to, say something, but you can't come up with the word, and, trying, and, it just gets frustrating. Sometimes people get embarrassed about not being able to come up with the right word at the right time. And what can eventually happen over time, if there's a lot of frustration and embarrassment about word retrieval difficulties, is that people can sometimes withdraw from, withdraw just from having conversations, withdraw and kind of avoid getting into social situations or doing things that involve a lot of language, like playing games and things like that. And so it really is, it can really get in the way. And so that's why I want to spend a little bit of time talking about what might be able to help as well. Okay, so, and these are, some of these strategies are, pretty common, and they may be things that you already use or that you see other people using. But these are just strategies that can try and help in the moment when you're having trouble coming up with the right word. So one thing is to narrow it down. So you give the general topic or category. The thing I'm trying to think of is a place, so it's a place. And then kind of, trying to give more information that will help the person that you're speaking with kind of be able to track where you're trying to get to with the word you're trying to say. Describing is another word retrieval strategy. So describing, if it's an object, you can give the listener information about what it does or what it looks like. So, oh, it's those things that cut, and, so they can, your listener or the person you're communicating with can kind of start to understand where you're going. An association is just giving a related word. So if you can think of, something that's similar or associated with the word you're trying to think of, that can help your listener as well. Another strategy is substituting. So you can say a different word with a similar meaning if that comes to mind. First letter cues, if you're having sort of that tip of the tongue and you're saying, oh, starts with a D and, it is a place, I just can't think of it. We went on vacation there about 3 years ago, and you start to give more clues like that can help. Gesturing can also help. We all gesture, when we communicate. Some of those are just gestures that kind of keep the flow going, but you can also use gestures to show an object or an action, and that can help as well. And then the other thing is just to take a moment, because when we're having difficulty coming up with the right word, and especially when we're in a pressure situation, the anxiety that you feel and the frustration can kind of almost make it a little bit harder to allow your brain to come up with that word. And so it is okay to just ask the person that you're talking to just say, can I just take a couple seconds here, take a deep breath and see what happens. And actually, when you're in what we call that tip of the tongue state, and you've got that word and it's right on the tip of your tongue, and you're just so focused on trying to think of that word, oftentimes what happens is once you give up, then a couple minutes later it comes back to you, right? So taking a moment can really just be a great way of giving your brain a little bit of a break, letting the anxiety or the frustration come down, and then coming back to it. I wanted to also just talk about for a second empowering communication support. So this can be if you are in if you're in a situation where you're communicating with somebody and they're having difficulty coming up with a word or expressing what they want to say, you can empower them, right? So sometimes what you can do is encourage a strategy. So one of the things that I just talked about, you could say, well, can you narrow it down for me? Or can you think of another word that means the same thing? So, you can empower somebody else's communication by providing that support. Another thing that empowers communication is giving some extra time, giving a cue, and that can help. Sometimes helping the person fill in the word is an option as well. But I think what we want to be careful of is that we don't, always fill in the word, right? And I think that's where, as a communication partner, we want to think about when is the right time to fill in that word, when is the right situation to do that. So sometimes if it's in a social situation, somebody might want you to fill in the word just to keep things going. But if it's just you and that person, and you can just give the extra time, maybe filling in the word isn't the way to go. And then always leaving the option of moving on open, right? So sometimes it's just frustrating and you say, how about we move on? And if it comes back to you, then, we'll just let me know and tell me what it was you were trying to say. And then that reduces the pressure and, and lets that other person kind of say, hey, okay, I'm just going to take a break and we'll come back to it, if we can. Okay. So those are some strategies and some ways to empower communication. But practice can also be important. And so, there are what we call in rehabilitation science, principles of neuroplasticity, or principles of ways to help your brain change. And so, if we have, particular words that are difficult that we know that we want to say often, then practicing those words can be really important. And what our principles of neuroplasticity tell us are a few things, and I'm just highlighting 3 of them here. Practice should be personally relevant. So your brain is very motivated by things that are meaningful, right? So if I was practicing to learn or be able to remember the name of my dog, I wouldn't just use a black and white picture of a dog. I would use the picture of my dog, right? Because that's meaningful to me, and that's going to bring all of the different parts of my brain together to really practice that and have that be a meaningful experience. Practice should be frequent, so we want to practice a lot to give our brain the opportunity to make those connections many times, and so that pathway can be established. And similarly, practice should be repetitive, because the more we practice something, the better that we get at it. So personally relevant, frequent, and repetitive are important aspects of practice. So there's some different types of practice that we can talk about. One of them is called spaced retrieval. And so if it's, this can work with a single word. This can work even with steps of an activity as well. So here, just the example of what is your dog's name? So, and then you say, repeat after me, Herbie. Okay, and so that's immediate. And then 15 seconds later, you ask, what is your dog's name? And then the person would say, Herbie. And if they were able to retrieve that, then you double the amount of time between the next time that you ask, what is your dog's name? Herbie. Okay, if that's correct, then you give it a minute and you ask again. And so by adding more space between the time that you're asking the person to retrieve the word, you're building that that time component. You've got the repetition in there, but you're also building that time in there. And that's important for establishing, that word again and being able to retrieve it when you need it. So, so that's called spaced retrieval. And you're relying on your memory system to help you retrieve that word, and you're kind of building up your memory system to do that. When you're trying to identify words that are important to you, you can think of all kinds of different aspects of your life. Maybe it's family members that you want to try to remember the names of, friends, neighbors, pets, places that you go, things that you like to do. It's important to be able to practice, have those, if there's specific words that are difficult for you, have those kind of written down and then start to build your practice around those. One of the ways to build that practice is to create clues that are important to you. So for example, if it's names that you are having some difficulty with, then you can have the name, have the picture right there. You're just activating all kinds of different parts of the brain that you want to be active when you want to retrieve this name. So we've got Mia, we've got Mia's picture. She's the oldest granddaughter. She loves dogs. And let's see here, I gotta move she's creative. Okay, so that's basically building a network around Mia. And so then when you want to say her name, then you kind of have, your brain is kind of pulling all that meaning together, and then hopefully helps you pull that form to be able to retrieve her name. Another way to do it, to help with retrieval is called mnemonics. So so for the name Mia, for example, you might say something like, okay, I'll remember it's amazing Mia, or musical Mia, or something that maybe you could even do a rhyme. So something like that can often help as well, especially with people's names. So creating clues that are important that will kind of help you, to be able to retrieve those names. Another way of practicing is by practicing 4 different words, retrieving the different aspects of meaning and different aspects of form. And the way that you can do that is, this is kind of what I call like a word frame, right? So, we can think of having some aspects of the meaning up top and the form on the bottom. So the category is animal, features are 4 legs, furry tail, action is bark and fetches, 1 syllable, starts with a d and rhymes with fog. And so if the issue that you're struggling with, or that someone is struggling with, is meaning and form, then these word frames can kind of help to reinforce that. There's another way that that can help, which is called creating short scripts. So if, for example, sometimes it's not necessarily like in a moment just retrieving 1 word, but you're having more difficulty, when you're trying to tell a story, for example, you can create scripts that will help you to remember the different parts of that story and the words that are associated. So writing down the main ideas, then developing a short script, practicing parts of that script for a few minutes each day. So that repetitive part, that frequent part, and then building up to the point where you're kind of doing all the parts of the script together, and then kind of using that in a context. So that can be helpful for kind of longer, not word level, but sort of story level production. There are also story support apps that are available. So 2 of them are Pictello and Story Creator. So this allows you to share stories with photos. You can have notes like what you see on the right-hand side that can kind of prompt. So, oh, okay, this, I want to talk about my summer vacation with Jackson. You can put recorded messages in these apps. But it might be a way that helps if you find yourself having difficulty remembering certain parts of a story that you want to tell, or remembering specific words. And then another way is creating visual reminders. So I talked about one of the issues, sometimes one of the consequences of word retrieval problems is withdrawing, right? So sometimes, people stop doing things that they used to enjoy. And so this example is, maybe somebody who used to play cards, right? But when you're playing cards, it's a fast moving game. You're usually playing with other people. You've got to remember that there's spades, hearts, trumps, diamonds. There's certain things that you have to know. And so it can feel like a pressure situation sometimes. But if you create visual reminders, something like what's on the slide here, then that can help you, in that situation, be a little bit more quick and be able to, participate without getting frustrated or, feeling like there's too much hesitation. So those visual reminders can be really helpful. And then the last thing I wanted to just put out there is that our brain loves to practice, in fun ways as well. And so word games are also a great way to keep our brain sharp and to let our brain practice retrieving words in different ways. So crossword puzzles are a great way. Playing Scrabble is a really great game. Categories where you have to come up with different items that begin with a particular letter. And then there's games like password and catchphrase and taboo, where you're trying to get somebody to, guess the right word or phrase by using other words. And so, just thinking about words as a way to have fun and as a way to stimulate and help your brain make those important connections is something that you can do as well. So I think I'm right at about time, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. So if anyone has any questions for Amy about word retrieval or anything at all, please post them in chat or the Q&A, and we'd be happy to answer your questions. For the people that posted uh, your positive feedback, we always appreciate that. Thank you very much. Yeah, so please post your questions in chat. While some people may be typing, I also want to just give an update for CEP Community Live next week. So let me go check our schedule. I believe next week is going to be Get Active. So next week we're going to have Tony and Mark. They're going to be doing a workout. So I hope to see everyone there. The Mark has been kind of introducing people to boxing, like shadow boxing, as like kind of like a workout. People have been really enjoying that. So that sounds interesting to you. I hope to see you all next week. Yeah, and I don't see any other questions. So the other quick announcement that I have is earlier people were asking about this Friday and the Brain Talk Live team. So I was able to get a little bit more information. So they are going to be doing a special online webinar, the Brain Talk Live team. And right now, if you look in chat, I am going to be posting a link for everyone to go check out more information about how to sign up for that. It looks like they're going to be having on some great clinicians and researchers. And yeah, so I think that if you like normal Brain Talk Live and you like CP Community Live, to go check out their special event. And so I'll be posting that URL. I also want to just make a quick note is that if you have seen their poster, their URL for their website is actually off a little bit. So please check out the link that I just posted right now and for more information on that. Okay, so we did get some questions coming in.
Okay, I can see the chat. Yeah. So there's a couple of people that are saying that they are in addition to word retrieval problems, have difficulty with spelling, and so that is fairly common as well when the breakdown is really more on the side of a language breakdown. It can impact all types of, or all what we call modes of language. So retrieving words, reading, spelling, even understanding sometimes. So there are evidence-based treatments for spelling problems. There are also apps that are available for naming problems, spelling problems, issues that are related to the different ways that language can break down. So those are common when the language system starts to break down a little bit. And then Fred said that he's developed a memory game. So that's interesting. Okay. I will, we'll have this information and I can email you about that.
So Amy, we also got a question coming in. Someone asked, do you have any recommendations on what to do when someone gets frustrated if if they're trying some of these word retrieval techniques. I think like it would also be interesting from like two perspectives. So if you are personally having trouble with getting frustrated with some of this, do you have any recommendations on how to deal with that frustration? And then maybe also if you're a care partner of some sort and you're helping people, kind of with this word retrieval, and the other person's getting frustrated, do you have any recommendations on how to kind of deal with that
Yeah,
frustration?
that's a really important question. And I think that goes back to, empowerment and empowering communication support. So, word retrieval is, yeah, it is something that can be very frustrating. And the way that you manage it may be different in different situations. And so when somebody gets frustrated, um, oftentimes what I'll do, for example, in a situation, is I will also acknowledge that as a communication partner, I'm also struggling, right? Because I might say, you know what, I'm part of this conversation too, and I'm having a little bit of trouble because I can't get it. And so part of this is my responsibility. And so I think a lot, like, communicating to the person that there are two people in the conversation and that it's not all on that other person to, to keep it going, can help a little bit to kind of meet the person halfway. When there's a lot of frustration, another thing you can do, and I mentioned this, but I think it's important, is you can just say, hey, would you like to take a break? Sometimes taking a break helps, and we can just come back to it. We can come back to this later. And that kind of gives that person a little bit of space to not feel on the spot, and to not feel like they're going to continue to be in this frustrating cycle of trying to remember a word that they can't remember. um, how you handle situations might be different in different contexts. So like I said before, maybe when it's just you and the person that you're communicating with, and it's just you two, maybe doing that filling in the word is okay. They don't mind that. But in another situation, that might make them feel embarrassed or offended or something. So I think having an open, honest conversation about what helps, and about when, certain things, when you want them to use certain strategies, or when they want you to help them in certain ways, can be helpful. They might say, I'd really appreciate it if you didn't just jump in when I'm having trouble. Okay, now I get it, right? So then, have a conversation about it. And I know that can be hard as well, but I think, when two people are working together to try and solve this problem of word retrieval, that, that can help.
So thank you. We also had someone comment that when they can't remember someone's name, that they go through the alphabet, and that helps them retrieve that. They were
Mhm.
asking if that's a meaning or form issue. I know that you're talking about like meaning and form errors, and so I guess it
Yeah.
kind of depends on what error the person was making. But can you kind of talk about, like using like an alphabet strategy for remembering words?
Yeah, so that's a great way of what we call like cueing yourself, right? So you're you're having a little bit of difficulty with the form, right? Because you know what you want to say, the person's name, you've got the picture of them in your mind, you know what you want to say about them, but you're not really able to come up. And all you need in that instance is just that first letter. And that's a really common thing when people are having word retrieval deficits, is for some people that first letter cue can really help. So you just say, oh, it's a, sit, and they're like scissors. and you just need that little bit of help. So that's what you're doing when you use that alphabet strategy.
We also someone was also asking if how do you create the cue picture for word retrieval without offending the person? I know that we kind of like
Yeah.
touched on that a little bit, but
Yeah. So this one might be related to that example I gave of like if it's for a card game. And so it may just be that you're thinking that the person may be offended by you suggesting that they need that. And I think that's where, so there's a couple things that come to mind with that. One, I think that's where, you can say, hey, I have an idea about how to make this, or get their feedback, if they express some concern or, frustration, you can say, well, I have an idea about how to make it better. Do you want me to share it with you? But if it's you that needs to initiate that conversation, then there may be different ways to do that. So you might be able to say, like, in order to keep the game moving, what we might do is, have some sort of, cue for the table. And it's not just for, that person, but you kind of have, a cue out there for everybody to see. So it's not like right by them, or you just use like simple name cards or something. So it's not a big template. I think there are ways to do it so it feels like something that everybody's benefiting from, rather than just something that one person needs. And if you kind of make it a group thing, that can sometimes feel a little bit less offensive or less like somebody needs, something special.
We also had another question. I think you mentioned some apps that help with spelling, like some mobile apps. Do you have any examples of those?
Yes, and actually I saw that, so thanks for coming back to it. What I'll do is these slides become available in the Google Drive, right, Matt?
Yes, yes.
So what I can do is I can add a couple of slides to this presentation for some naming apps, and then also for spelling. And then if you want to access the slides, then those apps will be there for you to have a look at.
Awesome, thank you. And yeah, everyone, I will be uploading those shortly. I think we got to all of the questions. I want to thank everyone for your great questions today. It was very interesting. Thank you, Amy, for having a great, very interesting talk. It's good to get some new topics in here as well.
Yeah. So there is one more question.
Yeah, I just saw that. So someone was asking if you have any recommendations for people with a lower education.
Yeah, so what I would say to that is that, the level of education, most of the strategies that I've talked about today, and even, some of the ways of practicing, don't necessarily, you don't have to have a specific level of education to do that, right? I think if we just think about the principles of what we want to do, we want to practice the meaning, or we want to practice the form, or we want to create, personally relevant cues. All of those things can be done, with anyone. And I would say that, if the issue is that, you know, you need to do it in a context that's a little bit different, and you know, the education level is getting in the way. I think that you can always come back to, how can I just make this so that, you know, I'm practicing the thing that they're having the most difficulty with. But I think most of what we discussed today could be done with any education level. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, we got a question asking, do you have any recommendations for confabulation and storytelling, specifically after a stroke, but if you have
Yeah.
any other?
So confabulation is, it is a common thing that happens after stroke. So it's, you know, kind of storytelling that's more like telling a story that is not something that, you know, actually happened, or, you know, so I think if you're in a situation where there's confabulation, there's a number of different reasons why that might be happening, but maybe creating scripts, like I said, would be one way to do it. So if there's a specific topic, and you know, you want to be able, somebody wants to be able to tell their story about what they did, you know, for their summer vacation, or you know, what they used to do as, you know, their profession. They're creating scripts can help to solidify that story and the key components of that story, so that somebody doesn't get into that sort of confabulatory you know, situation. That the app where there are pictures, and you know, where you could put in keywords or key phrases, you know, could also you know, could also help kind of keep somebody on target, and kind of focused on the elements of this story that they're trying to tell.
Awesome. So it looks like we are at time now. Amy, I want to thank you for coming by this week, and I want to thank everyone for coming to CP Community Live. As a reminder, next week we're going to be having Tony and Mark we're going to be doing a physical workout. So if you want to get a little workout, please join us next week, and I hope to see you all then.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.